right, go ahead.
Are we talking about Run the Jewels
We
again?
can.
Oh, well, that was a pretty dope album. Those first like 5 or 6 songs, the way they just flow into it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
I mean, what I love about those two guys, and they're both MCs who've been doing this in particular for a long time, is their dexterity verbally, their ability to articulate syllables clearly, rapidly, is something in which they are completely unparalleled. And, that is a group that I love to listen to really for like their technical abilities, both on the production side and on the MCing side. But it's all of their albums have been both a sonic treat and a sort of technical rapping clinic. And so, I have nothing bad to say about Run the Jewels.
Well, I'm glad that you feel that way. Did you? Because I let that thing play for the first time, and I was like, man, they just came right back into it.
Yeah.
They didn't hesitate one bit. But the thing I was looking for is I've noticed that they've gotten this political message.
Sure,
right?
yeah,
and they
yeah.
kind of adapted and kind of a Rage Against the Machine of rap for right now.
Definitely.
And
Zach De La Rocha's on the album.
right again. So it's like they have to. I was like, they're gonna have to get rid of this imagery.
Interesting.
Of running the
Of
jewels.
Running the Jewels, yeah.
Right. So how are they going to do that? And with this album, if you notice, the chain's not in the hand anymore.
Sure, yeah.
So it's like, oh, look, there's that slow transition. They have to transition into something more stable. And I think he even, LP even addresses it a little bit in this album where he thought that they were just going to be goofballs saying, yeah, look how cool we are and look how well we rap, and we're high-fiving on the man, whatever. But this has become something serious, and they kind of have a bit of a moral responsibility now that they've kind of assumed that Rage Against the Machine mantle.
No, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, though, because in rap, there is this tradition where you refer to sort of like message lyrics as jewels. I'm going to drop jewels on them. And so, I think there's a way to sort of preserve the whole Run the Jewels idea in light of that, right? Especially because they're not everything they do or every song is about politics, even if there might be lyrics here and there that inevitably bring back social issues or political issues. But, I think there's a way for them to sort of preserve that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Certainly, as if the jewels are the lyrics and you're going to run them. That makes perfect sense to me.
Perfect sense. Why America? Why Run the Jewels?
No. It's
Which brings
why
us,
America? Why? Like, oh, the dread is setting in. I'm a late bloomer. I get it.
So now that Trump's been inaugurated, it's hit you.
The inauguration.
At what point during the inauguration did you just go, "Oh fuck, this is not a rerun of The Apprentice. This is actually an inauguration for our presidency."
He's sitting there squinting, and he's like, "Arders, why?" It's like, oh, I just can't. I can't even. Like, seeing him up there in that role was just like, I saw the thing Trevor Noah did on Michelle Obama's faces.
Okay. Oh
my God, that was so accurate. It was. You can see like through the whole day, she's just going.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us were breathing probably the deepest sighs. I mean, I'm curious on, you're someone who obviously has been in management and is something of a scientist on the topic of management. What does it do to someone when they look at the person who's leading them and they know that this person is not qualified or competent? What should we expect psychologically from our federal workforce at this point?
Oh, welcome to 15 years of being a government employee. So,
yeah, actually,
I haven't known a different life.
As far as government incompetence, yeah, you having worked in Baltimore, that is an area of expertise for you.
Yeah, I mean, even the Marine Corps, you end up with people in the military. There'll be enlisted members, first sergeants, and stuff like that are really the second in charge of entire battalions who have no real management training whatsoever. So,
yeah.
You see that in the military as well, where I think the coding and the systems and customs of the military kind of preserve it. It's not the actual individuals and their intellectual capabilities. And in the police department, that's when I first saw it as like resounding. It was like, oh no, like I thought police were like everybody else, I thought they were professional. They knew what they were doing. Things were serious. And as soon as you see that, you're like, oh, That's a government employee's life.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's not even. But on Trump, what's settling in with me is like, okay, so if you go back and watch George Bush, second one,
George W.
I mean, he was a box of rocks, right? We know this, but it seems like I don't know who else suggested this. I kind of heard this before, that it was that he knew he was stupid, right? Like. You could fool me once. Yeah, you notice that can't be fooled again.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, he knew he was saying those things. How many times you see him give a speech, and he was like, the blank look in his eyes, and he's like, "Where's the Mandelas?" The Mandelas are dead. You know, it's like, Saddam killed the Mandelas. And you're like, wow. And it's just like, okay, he knows he's a caricature, but Trump doesn't seem to be aware.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the basic issue, though, for not just Trump, but I think more importantly, the people who really not just supported him, but really became true believers, right? The true believers in Trump don't seem to have any idea that this person is a caricature. You know, this in some ways goes back to our truth and fact discussion that we had previously. But they're just operating in a completely different value system. And I feel like it's like we have a view into a portal to another dimension, right? We can't actually cross it, but they're just in this space where the rules are different. You know, you drop something and it goes up instead of down. And
the alternative fact world.
Yeah, the alternative fact world. The doppelganger
I mean,
world.
those things are ridiculous, and we've seen these people lie on much bigger subjects before. It's just that they're so comical in caricature now. Like, we're lying about things that we don't even need to lie. It's like the pathological liar when it's just like, why are you lying
about this? Yeah.
I don't understand. But I think another reality that's hitting me right now is because we just got off of discussions and everybody's trying to get a quote from me on what we're going to do about the Dakota Access Pipeline. And sometimes when people ask me, I'm like, you obviously haven't been hearing me, because it means you have to ask the Sioux what they want. Yeah.
Let's just give a little context. Today, Trump signed a couple of executive orders essentially reauthorizing the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL pipeline. Supposedly. It is not clear whether those executive orders actually mean or do anything, especially because he also said that he's both projects are subject to renegotiation, especially on the issue of whether or not they're using American steel. And so it's not clear whether this actually changes anything about either of those
and
projects.
If the environmental impact survey is expedited, from what I understand, expedited is still like a year and a half, 2 years. So, I mean...
Expedited means something different in the government.
That means it's still over, right?
Sure,
I mean, because the investors would back out. So what am I actually looking at? I don't know. But it's still the wrong premise of what Veteran Stand is, because we don't make these decisions. We aren't white knights. We're not white saviors coming in as some group to impose our will on how it would be defended. If the Lakota Sioux wants to defend that, then fine. If they want to make a deal economically, well, then fine. I support them. It's not about this particular fight. So I have to deal with that. But what's hitting me now is the cowardness of Obama. If he would have done the right thing and had that moral integrity from that stance we made in December and just killed it entirely, we wouldn't be here.
Sure, yeah.
And it's like all of these things, the power that Trump's going to have, these are still the things that Obama set up and made these laws through, put the tax cuts through, didn't do any gun regulations. And these are the things that really affect the work that I'm trying to do.
Sure.
So I want to go to Flint.
I mean, in fairness on the gun regulation point, do you feel like he could have passed something stronger or done something just from his position as the executive?
He could have maintained the ban.
Which ban?
He didn't have to do anything. They had the high capacity ban,
the high capacity,
right? So he could, there was a couple ones that expired that all he had to do was renew.
They didn't require legislation to renew.
They were just renewals. So he didn't do any of those either. So it was just didn't do anything.
Sure,
So it's just like, what were we like? Okay, so no one's saying that Hillary is Obama, right? Like, we all know he's way better than her. Okay, so if what we wanted over this Trump issue was Clinton, and it's Obama's cowardice, who's way better than her, that has allowed us to even be in this position again, is this really a different position than we would have been in anyway?
So is it his cowardice or his centrism? Because I feel like Obama is, I mean, he's kind of a rhetorical progressive, but he is in a lot of ways kind of a bureaucrat. Like, he believes in the process. When you ask him why you have to fill out these forms, he's not like, yeah, I don't know, it's stupid. He's like, no, it's important because we need a paper trail. Like, I feel like he's that person, and that he made a lot of decisions that many of us would have preferred to have been sort of value-based decisions. And he made them more on the basis of what he believes are sound principles for functional government.
If we buy your argument, understand that comes along with the fact that he's a moron.
Because that's a strong word for President Obama.
Sure, he would be looking at known facts, known risks, and choosing to do a system which is known to fail. Otherwise, does he not know that the system is set up against the people? Is he ignorant of that?
I mean, I guess that the issue there is how we define failure and who defines failure. Like, what are the goals? What are the ends? And I mean, I think you're right. Obama's not someone who generally would agree with, especially radical progressive ends, maybe in spirit, but not in terms of actual administration.
But for North Dakota, does he think that we wouldn't return? Does he think
No,
that
of course.
what he said?
I mean, that's a good example of, like, just cancel it. I mean, it reminds me of what happened here in Maryland. Like, for years, people were saying, shut down the Baltimore City Juvenile Detention Center. It's, a nightmare. No human being should ever have to pass through there. And Democrats, including Governor O'Malley, were always like, no, we don't have anywhere else to put people, and it'll take too long, and we've got to first study the issue so we can know how we're going to do this, and it'll take a long time, which left a lot of people here feeling not exactly heard by a supposedly progressive administration. And certainly when O'Malley ran for president, he argued that I'm a true progressive. Look at my progressive credentials on the environment, expanded felon voting rights, whatever. But Larry Hogan got into the governor's seat, a Republican, and heard the same issue about the juvenile detention. So he just closed it. He was like, okay, just close it. That's it. And the Dakota Access Pipeline decision strikes me as that. It's like, so you'll say, okay, we're just going to recommit ourselves to the process. Just end it. Right? It's essentially what O'Malley did. No, there's a process. We have to respect the process. It's like, no, you don't. You can just end it.
Right. I mean, that's one of those things that it baffles me a lot with the bureaucracy of things in policing, even like as a thing where they say, oh, we can't possibly be in charge. What 8 people are you going to get to run? Like, how could you trust the citizens of this county and or city? And it's like, you're not going to trust 8 people that are your people, but you'll trust one person that has their own political agenda. That's your fallback. Like, what are we also saying in all these positions that we take on things? Why do we not trust human beings to do human being things? And it's like, that's what the left does all the time, right? They never do the strong thing because that's the false thing. They're not they're all these same barely separated from center things. The right goes way far right, and the left goes kind of maybe a little to the left, and they think that if you're left of right, then that makes you left. But you can like, these things are integers. You can go the other way.
No, definitely,
you can be more left than the right and still be on the right.
So this, I think, is a pretty relevant question, I think, for this moment in our history, and certainly in terms of your work with Veterans Stand and your activism. Because there is a question of, I think, whether the right in pursuing that sort of strategy has effectively reduced everything to politics, to the point where even facts are subject to a sort of political criterion decision making. And the left has generally not done that. And so is the left's sort of unwillingness to do that something that we should say, you're not realizing this is politics and you're in a fight, and if the other guy's going to fight dirty, you need to fight dirty too? Or do we say, no, the principles are important, decorum is important, there's a way you go about things? And even in the policy realm, you have to acknowledge that most policies are theories. We think this will help people, but we don't actually know what will happen. And so philosophically, we might say, we're not going to go down that road, even if it costs us, because it would be a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, this is the problem with maybe just the paradigm that this is even our choice, like that this decorum or radicalism is even your foundation. Like maybe it's something different. Maybe that boxing ourselves into our views of what government looks like is kind of what is blinding us. I think it's like the Second Amendment argument that we get into, and we talk about like it's supposed to be a living and breathing document, but then as soon as we ask for it to live and breathe, people object and say to keep it the way it is. So it's even in politics, like even as soon as we start to try to throw in a third party or different thinking, it's like, no, we're automatically in everything's politicized. So if it is politicized and one side is adversarial, if you aren't just as adversarial, they're always going to win. So another parallel that I talked about cops with all the time, they say cops always get divorced, right? And the male cops do. So they would say, they would talk about themselves about what they were doing in their divorce custody case hearings, right? And they're always fighting for fair, and their spouse was always fighting to win,
to win,
right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, you're fighting for fair, she's fighting for win, which means you're guaranteed to lose. And it's the same thing here. If we don't fight for the win, then you will lose. So it's like the healthcare thing. Like that was what they did then, is they didn't fight for the win. They fought for fair. And their idea of fair was funneling proceeds through private companies, because that's what the right wing would want to do. So if we're going to try and expand healthcare, well, then we'll make sure that all your crony capitalism can siphon it off the top and all your buddies can get a cut. Right? That's like the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that that's more or less the system we ended up with. However, the politics of the Democratic caucus that existed when Obama took office, I think there were two major issues. Ted Kennedy was about to die of brain cancer, and you still had a lot of the old blue dog Democrats still caucusing with the Democratic Party, and you needed certainly Teddy in the Senate, because you didn't really have that large a majority yet. And you needed also those blue dogs on board, and they were never going to go with the more progressive policy options. And so I think there's also a question that, does the left organize enough on the basis of its policy values, or is it too focused on sort of building these broad coalitions that maybe share certain goals and commitments, but inevitably vary widely on the details and how we might go accomplishing those things? And is that something, because the Tea Party has certainly organized around a particular set of values, for better or for worse, whether you agree with them, whether you hate them, whether you think they're the best thing or the worst thing. There's no question that they have a commitment to a very specific set of values and statements and discourses. But it's less clear on the Democratic side across the coalitions. And we saw that in this election when Hillary had to rely on the energy of the various groups in the coalition. It didn't turn out that way for her.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously what happened in that situation. But are those things truly applicable now in this new environment? Like, so it was, money used to be what you needed to get that attention and stuff now. But you don't, like, Trump literally tweeted himself and social media tooled himself into the position where he is now. So it's another one of those things where I think that the establishment is kind of like Blockbuster or the music industry or something right now, where they're sticking to this old paradigm that simply isn't true anymore. And it's hard to navigate around what any of that means if none of it's actually true anymore. When you're talking about with the left and liberalism, I don't even know what it is. I'm relatively new to it. And like the Women's March thing and the mixed signals that were coming down in DC from what the left is, I don't feel any type of coalition.
Yeah, I mean, the Women's March is a good example, because I was there, and, it was hard, to me, and at least where I was, it seemed more or less like a 50-50 crowd. It wasn't just women, obviously. And there were also, you could tell there were people from, across the sort of leftist coalition. But I know inevitably that probably for a lot of people, some of them were there specifically to march about women's issues. But a lot of people were there to march against Trump, right? And so the issues that most drive their opposition or their even willingness to engage energetically in politics or or demonstrations or resistance. It could be any number of a million issues. And there were even controversies, like you said, leading up to the march. Who's included in women? If you're a pro-life woman, is this march for you? If you're, is it only for pro-choice? And so there were questions like this. Are enough women of color being given sort of a leadership position and stakes in the organization? So clearly, it's not a coalition that. It's bound by something, but it's not always clear what exactly that is. And then when we sit down and say we need to propose policy, you get a million different ideas from different people, and then you have to sort of craft something that you can actually present.
Let me tell you what I see from Democrats.
Okay.
So this is relatively an outsider because I never even really was into politics before.
Mm.
I feel like the Republican and conservative side is a Ford commercial.
Okay.
F-150 commercial.
Okay.
And the left is a Barbie Malibu commercial. And like they are like and they have their money and they have their things and they want to be nice to people. But so that's the only thing that the minority, oppressed and marginalized can attach to, because you'd rather be around those people and riding in LA in the back of a Jeep than hanging out with a bunch of hillbillies in their F-150 drinking beer, right?
Sure.
So you get stuck into that paradigm. So then they kind of get associated. The Barbie Malibus get associated as Malibu Barbie. Why am I saying that backwards? I've seen enough commercials, but anyway.
I think people know what you mean.
So then they're there at the march, and you can see them. And I think that there was one picture that encapsulated it so well. There was a black woman sucking on a lollipop that had a sign that said, "Don't forget, it was white women who voted Trump in," and had 3 white women behind her sitting on their cell phones, kind of oblivious to everything going on around them. And I was like, oh, there's so much in that picture. It's unbelievable how much is there.
Yeah.
But that's what the party looks like to me. So they're not woke at all. Like I saw things where they're making fun of Trump, saying he's so close to Putin that he's gay and showing pictures of them. It's like, how woke are you that you're making fun
a
of
homophobic?
Being gay?
And that was for me one of the striking things about the march. And I have a number of photos of different signs, but there was a sort of rampant homophobia that was underlying a lot of the messaging. And nobody seemed to raise an eye, right? And this is one of the things that, like, the more I have engaged the left as a journalist, as someone who's supposed to sort of like stay back and not actually be engaged in the values themselves, I'm just reporting, just here to observe and say what I saw, the less I feel like the identity politics and all of these things are actually principled stances, because I feel like I'm constantly running into homophobia, misogyny, all sorts of problematics, racism certainly. Among leftist persons. And,
if Julian Assange gets his tax returns tomorrow, what's the left going to say? But
exactly. Right. And so at some point there has to be, like, if we're not committed to principles, I'll put it this way. At this point, I kind of, the more time I've spent around leftist activists, I'm kind of like John Lennon in Revolution. Like, yeah, I hear you, brother. I appreciate you trying to do good work, but you just sound kind of hateful to me. I'm just not trying to help you. And especially, I can't help but notice that, like, when I speak to poor black people in Baltimore, my experience of them is that they're not like super liberal progressive generally, right? Like I hear a lot about personal responsibility. There's obviously a strong religious dynamic. I have found it to be a fairly conservative community, the one I've experienced here in Baltimore. But the most prominent black voices are all progressives. And I can't help but notice that they're prominent because the media makes them prominent, and that they're all sort of college educated and speak a bourgeois liberal vocabulary, which is the same vocabulary that journalists generally speak, because we also tend to be college educated bourgeois folk who get these jobs. And so we essentially see ourselves in these persons, agree with them and say, well, clearly you're the voice of the black community. Meanwhile, we never speak to poor black people, right? Most journalists never speak to poor black people unless there's already a police officer present or, some other bourgeois intermediary just introduced them. And so we rarely get the actual black perspective, even from our supposedly black spokespeople in this city. And, at some point you have to ask, is the left committed to helping the poor or helping poor minorities? Or is it committed to having their narrative about what's really most wrong with them win out over the conservative one?
Yeah, I really think they just end up looking, maybe our society as a whole just ends up looking for the people that agree with them already, and then they side with them because they're who they are. And I think in the left, it was absolutely encapsulated. What was her slogan?
I'm with her.
I'm with her. All he had to say was, I'm with you. And it's over.
Yeah.
You know, like that tells you what it's like. They voiced their allegiance to her no matter what it was. Like, she would have pushed through TPP. She would have probably gone on to more mass incarceration. She wasn't going to do every position that we push her on left is because some kind of radical left agenda pushes it for a moment and kind of just moves the bar a little bit. So that is what it is. And I think Cenk Uygur and started with TYT and all, they started a new thing now called Justice Democrats.
Justice Democrats, yeah.
And so I really, maybe like the veteran stand is another aspect of that kind of same angle where it's not, the liberalism isn't really what the woke kind of community and marginalized communities or people that are educated in what this is and the oppressed need to be in. We need to be in something different that's way more progressive and isn't liberalism. Like I feel like liberalism has this dirty feel to it, and then like when somebody comes in white knights and I feel that liberalism, I'm like, oh, it is dirty, it feels gross, you know, like when I see it, like I didn't know what it was before.
Yeah, I mean, so one of my issues with the term liberal, or referring to liberalism, is when I hear liberalism, I think like the philosophical system developed in the Enlightenment, right? And so the simple truth is, when we speak about little L liberals or little C conservatives in terms of the left and right wings of our political spectrum, they're actually both liberals in the philosophical tradition, right? They both believe in a sort of rational individual agent generally, and they're both sort of articulating variations on the narrative of freedom, equality, justice, etc. And so to me, you're both, you're different sides of the same coin, and it doesn't really seem that most liberals understand or appreciate, in my experience, what they're actually arguing for. Once you start to push them on things, it's like it quickly falls apart, and it just becomes like a series of slogans. And it's like, yeah, I can't vote for your fucking slogans, dude. Like, that's not a fucking plan.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm coming into this new, like we were saying, so people, will say, make fun of me because I voted for Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
Right? But in that same voice, they're fighting for Obamacare. It's like, that's Mitt Romney's plan.
It wasn't the plan he ran out in 2012.
We're not aligned to the principle. We're again aligned to the idea, and I was moving left and like Democratic because I was identifying with their conclusions, right? But as you get closer and you see the methodology, you're like, whoa, I can't be involved in this. I just agreed with your conclusions.
Yeah, because increasingly it feels like, oh, you got here by accident, didn't you?
Right.
You did.
Because of where you grew up. Like, it's like, it's the same thing. Like you're saying, it's the same coin. So the same people that grew up with those conservative parents and have those misinformations that the left is making fun of, it's like, if you guys are objective, I'm watching you do the same exact thing.
I completely agree. And that's why, like, once I start to push and I see that you haven't thought through a lot of these issues, that's it. I'm not covering you anymore, because I think you're actually dangerous. Because at that point, what you're doing is you're suggesting that because I've concluded something, it must be so, right? You've essentially taken the whole on earth as it is in heaven and turned it into on earth as it is in my mind. And as much as I respect a lot of progressive liberals and consider them to be highly intelligent people, I don't think they're God. And so I really don't care what conclusion they happen to land at from their very finite position, especially when I start to realize that a lot of this isn't even all that principled or considered, right? Like, I experienced this a lot with activists of color who sort of adopt these nationalist standpoints. And I'm like, but to adopt this nationalist standpoint, you're inevitably sort of making this argument that essentializes race, which is exactly what the racist does. That's the entire premise of racism, is that race is an essential characteristic and that it defines who you are, right? And so race becomes destiny. And the nationalist argument is that race is destiny. And while your destiny might be like some black utopia, and the, racist destiny might mean something completely different, you're subjected to us. If you're both arguing that race is destiny, you've lost me, because that's bullshit.
Yeah, it's hard to like, isn't that's the whole anti-intellectual theme and thread that goes throughout our society. This alternative facts comment, I heard everybody seeing the hashtag, right? Like, I saw the hashtag and I just assumed what happened, right? And then today on the way down here, I actually heard the clip. I still haven't watched it. I just heard it. And it was like, oh gosh, that's why it's called this. Why, America? Why? How can we have somebody on TV speaking for the president of the United States talking about alternative facts on known falsities being challenged by the court? It's so bad that corporate media, that's definitely our enemy, is stepping back and going, what are you talking about? You know, it's gotten that bad.
That's right. When even the people who we know don't share our values are like, wait a minute.
That's what I'm saying.
Stop.
Like, once the enemy of your enemy is that clear and well defined.
But I mean, that was one of the fascinating things for me about the Trump phenomenon, because you had a lot of people like George Will and Jennifer Rubin and Michael Gerson and David Brooks, even guys like William Crystal, like, luminaries in the conservative ideological spectrum.
Who the hell are any of those people?
Exactly. They're all conservative columnists or intellectuals here in America, but they're prominent people in the conservative sphere. And it didn't matter that all of them opposed Trump, right? It didn't matter that there was nothing about Trump that appealed to them. Voters, that's not the point here.
That's the false paradigm, right? So it's not this conservative Republican thing, Republican conservative or liberal Democrat thing in real life. It's another one of our social constructs that we're forcing into those two groups. But there's this populist, and even I think a lot of Trump voters are progressive populists who just don't
realize
they're filled with misinformation from Fox TV. So they're people that are understanding their plight. They just don't understand why.
So let's finish on this question, because this is something that I've been thinking a little bit about. One of the things we talk about in the healthcare arena, especially as people on the left side of our politics, is we say, one of the reasons that market solutions to healthcare are inefficient or ineffective is because of information asymmetry, right? Most people don't know enough about anatomy in the human body and existing treatments and medical options and what the science says about these, chemical process, whatever you're dealing with, you don't know shit about it. And so you're not really in a position to make healthcare decisions. If the doctor says you need X treatment, you just do what they say, right? You're sick, you want to get better. And that drives an inability of sort of the normal market forces to play a role and reduce costs as a result. But I feel like increasingly in our democracy and in any democratic context today, because of advances in technology, and because our economic and political arrangements at this point are so complex, right? Like, you almost need a master's degree in economics just to understand something like exchange rates, right? Like, you can understand it on the surface, but to understand, like, how do we even get to, like, a currency rate, and that you need a lot of learning, which almost none of us have, right? I have a lot of learning, but not in those arenas. So I despite all that, I really don't have that level of sophistication where you would necessarily trust me inherently or, implicitly on those issues. And that is increasingly true in our politics, I feel like, as the world gets more complex, as our economic arrangements get more complex. The average voter is really in a position where they're suffering from such an asymmetry of information and power that all they can kind of do is rely on slogans. And so where does that leave us?
Well, you're talking about why true democracy doesn't work. Right. So we know an actual democracy would fail. It doesn't work because people are too dumb for those reasons. Right.
So the Electoral College is good because that's kind of.
Well, I wouldn't say the Electoral College is good because you have people that are represented as under that system. But the idea of maybe some kind of qualifications to be, it could just be knowing enough about politics, and you just have to make sure it's fair.
I mean, but it's a challenge, right? Because once upon a time, we, try to make it like you had to own land to vote, or, and these are inevitably sort of like racist policies that, right? It's easy for me with a PhD to sit here and be like, most voters just don't have enough information. They should be allowed to vote. But I also just admitted, right? Like, I don't know shit about economics, if I'm honest, right? Like, I read Paul Krugman regularly, so I might have like a better ability to fake like I know about economics than someone who just graduated high school, but
you don't need that.
No, I appreciate that.
All I need is for you to be able to decipher what you do know and what you don't know. So if my test is only on your ability to recognize your own flaws, then I can have a person that I know will look to the proper authority figure that has that kind of information to help make decisions. I mean, that's what we do in our arguments now. We lean on the science of others.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I just don't. I don't think that there's a way to sort of not inevitably build inequality into the attempt to draw the line somewhere.
Sure. Where's the inequality, though? So I don't want the inequality to be in race or any of those protected classes.
Yeah.
Can it be in IQ score? Possibly. Like there are certain things.
But I mean, IQ is one of those things.
Yeah, it's one of those tests. So that was a terrible example.
No, but the other thing is, even if we could create a perfect system, we'd only be creating it perfect from the standpoint where we are right now in terms of our history. So we've learned certain lessons, let's say, about misogyny or homophobia or racism. But those lessons themselves emerge from systems built on, the previous lessons of the last system, right? I mean, the fact that we live in a Western democratic state is itself a function of the West's move away during the colonial period and into the industrialization period away from monarchy. So our system is based in part on the flaws of the last system. And certainly when you look at the Bill of Rights in the American Constitution, it's clearly just a wartime Constitution Bill of Rights. It's like, when's the last time a soldier tried to sleep in your house? Never. But all those Bills of Rights relate to what happens when a foreign power is telling you what to do, which is simply to say, like, we could maybe draw a line that eliminates the problems we know are problems today because of our history. But inevitably, we'd be creating new oppressions, right? Like,
right, but you understand my police model.
No,
so that's
yeah.
But that's the exact same thing. So it's not. That's what I'm saying. These systems don't work with that. So it's okay that we make mistakes now, as long as we kind of adapt a scientific method to our governance, where we are constantly looking for the flaws, having systems which identify them and then change them, and then implementing those changes on a rapid chance. So we're not even to the point with like computer software where it was version 1.0 and then we did version 2.0 and then version 3.0. We've been kind of stagnant for a long time. So we're like stuck in 2.3 or something.
But I agree with you. And in some ways, what you're saying is like we need to become more technocratic about these issues. But the problem is that we can't even agree what the problem is, right? Which is what the whole alternative facts universe is. And this is something I've been thinking about. Part of the problem with the conversation about policing is that the left thinks policing is a question and the right thinks policing is an answer. And that's a tough, where do you have a conversation when that's you're starting from two very different premises?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I got to do with educating people that they're both wrong. Yeah, no, so we have to rethink these ideas from scratch every single time with the new information that we have. It's like, it's chaos theory, like I'm starting to see that the world, especially in its global context with technology and everything, anything that we thought was static, and maybe we will find information that is true at this moment, right? Because true is only from a matter of perspective and at a moment. We had that talk, right? Or what is factual is still only from a perspective and a moment. If you talk about the fourth dimension of physics, it's actually everything is a matter of perspective. So if we get people to understand all of those things of what is true, then we can move into something. But like, I don't know a way to make it simple to just be like, we have to constantly evolve in the cycle of what we recognize as being true, because with technology and a global environment, it changes like our perspective changes before we can even implement the addressing of it, if that makes sense.
No, look, I mean, I do think that increasingly And we're nowhere near this point because we're still like basically having like a 18th or 19th century fight in terms of like our political spectrum. But increasingly, I do think that a basic premise of policy debate has to be that we don't actually know enough to propose a solution. We know
It's a
some
hypothesis.
things and we have a hypothesis and we have to treat it as that, right? If the ACA was a hypothesis as opposed to like supposedly the solution to our, right? Maybe we have a different debate in our politics when we just treat policy as always inevitably a hypothesis. But I mean, we've been going for a little longer than usual. So I'm going to give you final word. Is the problem liberals or is the problem democracy?
Oh God, I mean, they already call me an elitist. It's democracy. Democracy doesn't work, people. That's why we're a democratic republic. We've already known that democracy doesn't work. A democratic republic isn't working too well under capitalism. We have to think it over, and it's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to not know the solution. It's always a hypothesis. That's what I struggle with, that with the police model. What are we going to do? How do we know what it looks like? How do we know what it works? It's a hypothesis, and if it does work, it only worked under this context in this scenario at this moment, so try to improve it for the next time. Wake up. Mistakes are golden. That is what we want. Every single time that we do something correct, all we did was prove our preconceived notion and didn't advance our intellect whatsoever. We should be aiming for mistakes and fixing them to make sure they never happen again, because when we make mistakes, that means we fell off the bike because we were trying something hard to really improve our society as a whole.